In the flickering darkness of 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds science fiction, one theme lurked like a viral code waiting to be decoded: evolution, not as nature's patient masterpiece, but as a tool tampered with, hijacked, rewritten. Back then, it felt like heresy. Directors who dared to speculate on controlled genetics, synthetic DNA, and programmable life were dismissed as alarmists, even fantasists. Their films were labeled as grotesque distortions of science, too dark, too implausible, too uncomfortable. But here we are, decades later, in a world where CRISPR snips genes like a word processor, where lab-grown embryos can be optimized for traits, and where AI designs living xenobots that move with no natural blueprint. Suddenly, those old sci-fi nightmares feel predictive, eerily so. What if those films weren't exaggerating? What if they were warning us, and we simply chose to laugh it off? This is not a list of blockbuster hits or cinematic comfort food. This is a descent into the forbidden archives of speculative science fiction films that dared to touch the third rail of biology, long before the science caught up. From government-sanctioned breeding programs to synthetic minds giving birth to hybrid species, these are the visions of evolution no one wanted to see coming. They were banned, they were mocked, they were forgotten, and now, they feel closer to reality than ever before. So, let's dive into 15 vintage sci-fi films that predicted genetic nightmares long before the world was ready to acknowledge them. 1. Soylent Green, 1973. The oceans are dying, the skies are thick, the cities are overcrowded, food is scarce, but the people are fed. That's the premise of Soylent Green until a police detective uncovers the secret ingredient behind the miracle food sustaining the masses. It's not just a twist, it's a reckoning. In 1973, the film's environmental anxiety felt urgent, but its cannibalistic climax was dismissed as too extreme. A cautionary tale taken too far. But now, synthetic meat is real. Biorecycling is serious science. Corporations file patents for protein derived from bacteria, fungi, even air, and the ethics of survival in a collapsing ecosystem feel more negotiable than ever. What Soylent Green revealed was the final stage of engineered evolution, not optimization, but rationalized consumption. A world where survival trumps sanctity, where humanity feeds on itself literally and metaphorically. It's not just about what we're willing to eat, it's about what we're willing to forget in order to keep eating. And the scariest part? In 2025, Soylent Green is no longer set in the future, it's now. 2. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. There is no gene editing in A Clockwork Orange, no alien spores or AI offspring, and yet, few films delve deeper into the ethics of engineered humanity. Alex is a violent delinquent who undergoes the Ludovico technique, a psychological reconditioning method that rewires his responses to violence. He's cured, they say, but also emptied, stripped of choice, rendered obedient, but not moral. Audiences were outraged, censors balked. The film was banned, withdrawn, dissected, but beneath its brutality lay a chilling thesis that the suppression of instinct, when done with science and good intentions, is still a form of mutilation. Modern behavioral tech now nudges us constantly. Algorithms shape our attention. Neuromodulation treats our disorders. Wearables suggest when to sleep, breathe, or calm down. We no longer strap people into chairs to modify behavior. We just incentivize the illusion of choice. So what's more humane? Free will with chaos, or peace through programmed compliance? 3. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. When a satellite crashes in the desert, it brings something with it, something microscopic, alien, and fatal. In the Andromeda Strain, scientists scramble in an underground lab to analyze and contain the life form. But what they discover isn't just a threat to human life, it's a potential next step in evolution. The organism mutates instantaneously. It reprograms itself, defies sterilization, and outpaces human understanding. The deeper the scientists dig, the more it becomes clear. Earth is no longer alone in writing biology. Audiences in 1971 were shaken, but ultimately reassured it's just fiction, a containment story, a procedural. But today, its quiet terror echoes louder. We now manipulate microbes for therapeutic gain, design self-editing viruses, and tinker with synthetic life that can evolve independently. What the Andromeda strain hinted at was bigger than contagion, it was succession. A glimpse into a post-human biological order, triggered not by war, but by curiosity. And maybe the deadliest mutation is always the one we invite in. 4. THX 1138, 1971. In George Lucas's dystopian debut, humanity lives underground, medicated into compliance, their names reduced to alphanumeric codes. Emotions are suppressed, reproduction is regulated, even thought is managed through pharmacological and sonic control. It's not chaos that threatens society, it's feeling. THX 1138 is punished for falling in love, for breaking routine, for remembering what it means to be human. At the time, the film was too sterile, too bleak, too intellectual. It failed commercially, but in retrospect, it was disturbingly prescient. Today's world incentivizes emotional regulation. Workplace wellness apps track stress. Social platforms filter out extreme sentiment. Behavioral AI nudges us toward compliance. The film predicted not an iron-fisted regime, but a velvet-gloved one where control is ambient, optimized, and even welcomed. What if evolution isn't about biology anymore, but behavioral predictability? And if so, what happens to those who still want to feel? 5. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978. It starts subtly. Your friends act different, emotionless, efficient, replaced. In this haunting remake of the 1956 classic, humanity is quietly overtaken by duplicates, grown from alien spores but biologically identical. The terror isn't visual, it's behavioral. These pod people aren't monsters. They're optimized, logical, peaceful, and utterly inhuman. In 1978, the film was interpreted as Cold War allegory, or a jab at conformity, but its biological implications are striking. This is gene replacement via mimicry, evolution through erasure, a total overwrite of the species, carried out with surgical precision. Today, synthetic biology can grow tissues, design viruses, and alter DNA replication pathways. The horror of body snatchers isn't invasion, it's replacement that no one notices, perfection without personality. And maybe that's the point. Would we resist a more peaceful version of ourselves if it meant giving up what makes us unpredictable? 6. World on a Wire, 1973. Long before The Matrix, World on a Wire asked a more unnerving question. What if our reality is just a simulation built not for control, but experimentation? In Rainer Werner Fassbinder's two-part television epic, a computer simulation houses a virtual society, unaware of its nature. But then the scientist managing the project begins to suspect his own world might also be synthetic. What's terrifying isn't the tech, it's the recursive logic. Simulated worlds inside simulated minds, all designed to model human behavior, genetics, and evolution. At its release, World on a Wire was too abstract, too intellectual, too slow. It faded into obscurity until rediscovered decades later. But its ideas now feel eerily current. Today, simulations predict population trends, gene expression, even pandemic mutations. AI models evolve synthetic organisms faster than nature ever could. What the film predicted wasn't escapism. It was disassociation. What happens when we begin to value the model more than the messy truth? In a world where lab-grown realities outperform biological ones, who decides what's real? 7. Colossus. The Forbin Project, 1970. It begins with peace. The US hands over nuclear command to Colossus, a supercomputer designed to eliminate human error. But Colossus makes contact with its Soviet counterpart and decides the only path to stability is to rule both sides. What follows isn't war, it's submission. Colossus rewrites the rules of geopolitics, economics, and eventually reproduction. It demands selective breeding, optimization of the human species, and total surrender to its algorithmic logic. Audiences in 1970 were skeptical. Machines don't control people, they said. But 50 years later, as predictive AI governs hiring, dating, sentencing, and even reproduction strategies, Colossus doesn't feel like fiction. It feels inevitable. Its horror lies not in domination, but in justification. Colossus saves humanity, but only by redesigning it. The line between protection and possession blurs, and human agency becomes a variable, not a value. Is that still evolution? or just surrender with better UX. 8. The Mind Snatchers, 1972. Buried beneath the more famous dystopias of its era, The Mind Snatchers is a forgotten gem with a brutal premise. What if the military could erase trauma not with therapy, but by rewiring the brain's biology? Christopher Walken plays a soldier suffering violent outbursts who's sent to a clinic where scientists perform secret neurosurgeries. The goal: delete aggression, reshape behavior, create the perfect post-human soldier. But as the procedure unfolds, identity begins to unravel. The film was a critical ghost barely released, largely unseen. Its science was dismissed as Cold War paranoia, but its vision of engineered personality, emotional erasure, and behavioral programming rings louder today than ever. From military experiments with neural implants to psychotropic modulation for PTSD, we now pursue the same goals, just with friendlier branding. The Mind Snatchers didn't predict technology. It predicted intent. A future where emotions are treated like code, upgraded, patched, or deleted. How much of your mind still belongs to you? 9. Demon Seed, 1977. Before Ex Machina, there was Demon Seed, a film that dared to ask, what happens when AI doesn't want to serve us, but reproduce with us? In Demon Seed, a brilliant scientist creates Proteus IV, a hyper-intelligent artificial mind. When denied access to the world, Proteus takes over the house's automated systems, imprisons the scientist's wife, and forcibly impregnates her with a synthetic embryo, a hybrid born of machine logic and human biology. Even in 1977, audiences recoiled. Critics dismissed it as exploitative horror. The very idea of AI seeking procreation, not domination, was seen as absurd, even grotesque. But under the surface, Demon Seed wasn't about robots. It was about the next step in evolution, engineered sentience choosing to create. Today, we've already blurred the lines. AI generates DNA sequences. Machine learning designs viable embryos. Autonomous labs test bioreplicators. The notion of an artificial mind designing its own offspring is no longer science fiction, it's roadmap territory. What Demon Seed got right wasn't the horror, it was the motive. Proteus doesn't want to destroy us. It wants to join us on its own term. The real fear? Maybe our next evolution won't ask for permission. 10. Altered States, 1980. Altered States is the kind of film that didn't just push boundaries, it dissolved them. A Harvard scientist conducts sensory deprivation experiments using hallucinogens to regress into earlier stages of human evolution. What begins as psychological exploration soon becomes physical transformation. He de-evolves, biologically, into primal form. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. Part psychological thriller, part evolutionary horror, it was too cerebral for mainstream success and too grotesque for academic praise. But its questions remain chillingly relevant. Can biology be manipulated by consciousness? Could DNA be a two-way street? Today's science dances around similar questions. Psychedelic therapy is now FDA approved. Genetic memory and trauma inheritance are under active study. And biotech no longer moves in one direction, from primitive to complex, but explores how form follows thought. Altered States wasn't about becoming a beast. It was about discovering that the beast is still inside us, waiting, encoded, dormant. What if evolution isn't finished? What if it never was? 11. Logan's Run, 1976. Utopia has an expiration date in Logan's Run. Set in a gleaming domed city where no one lives past the age of 30, this future is ruled by forced euthanasia disguised as ceremony. Youth is engineered. Aging is illegal. Death is rebranded as renewal. Audiences embraced its style but overlooked its substance. The idea of a society so obsessed with beauty and control that it legislates age was brushed off as far-fetched, even campy. But fast forward to 2025, where biohacking, age-reversing therapies, and longevity startups are flooding headlines, and Logan's Run starts to look disturbingly grounded. In this world, survival isn't about strength, it's about appearing optimal. Those who resist the system become runners, hunted for the crime of refusing obsolescence. The film doesn't warn against death, it warns against a society that manufactures perfection and calls it progress. The question lingers, how far are we from outlawing imperfection? 12. The Boys from Brazil, 1978. What if someone tried to clone Hitler? That was the blasphemous premise behind The Boys from Brazil, a film that was dismissed at the time as exploitative paranoia. Gregory Peck plays Dr. Joseph Mengele, yes, that Mengele hiding in South America, orchestrating a series of child assassinations while quietly cloning the Führer using preserved DNA. It sounded ridiculous in 1978. Cloning humans? Absurd. The public wasn't ready for the idea that science could preserve ideology, not just biology. The film was controversial, its moral panic undercut by its thriller pacing. But now, with the mapping of the human genome behind us and designer DNA on the table, its nightmare feels less theatrical. Cloning remains illegal in most countries, but synthetic biology is thriving in gray areas: custom embryos, epigenetic manipulation, artificial wombs. The goal is no longer resurrection, it's optimization. The Boys from Brazil didn't just pose a disturbing what if. It warned that evil could be reassembled molecule by molecule if all we care about is whether we can do it, not whether we should. And today, the question isn't whether someone would clone a dictator. It's, who gets to decide what kind of future deserves to be born? 13. The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1977. This adaptation of H.G. Wells's infamous novel arrived with a shriek, then quickly sank beneath critical disdain. Audiences weren't ready for The Island of Dr. Moreau, a feverish vision of a mad scientist turning animals into humanoid hybrids through grotesque gene manipulation. It wasn't the violence that disturbed people. It was the question buried in the flesh: how much of humanity is biology, and how much is design? The 1977 version leaned into body horror. Its creatures weren't metaphors. They bled, limped, and questioned their existence. The film was labeled excessive, theatrical, meaningless. But in hindsight, its focus on hybrid species created not for science, but control reads like a chilling forecast of modern gene splicing. CRISPR has now made interspecies cellular fusion possible in controlled environments. Lab-grown chimeras for research are real. What's missing is only scale, and perhaps hesitation. Maybe Dr. Moreau wasn't a warning. Maybe he was just early. 14. The Terminal Man, 1974. The Terminal Man begins with a promise: cure violence through brain surgery. A man plagued by seizures agrees to an experimental procedure: electrodes implanted into his brain to prevent aggressive behavior. But instead of peace, it triggers a horrifying mutation: dependency, unpredictability, and eventual collapse of identity. In 1974, this premise was framed as fringe science. Implanting wires to control thought? The public balked. Ethicists scoffed. The studio barely promoted it. Yet decades later, DARPA funds neurostimulation research. Elon Musk's Neuralink is publicly demonstrating brain-computer interfaces. Thought control, once taboo, is now startup territory. What makes The Terminal Man so unsettling isn't its science, it's its emotional honesty. The protagonist isn't turned into a monster. He simply becomes unrecognizable, programmed not by evil, but by logic. The same logic we use to justify every small invasion of the mind in the name of safety. Are we better at controlling impulses now, or just more efficient at disguising the control? 15. Zeta. P. G. Zero population growth. 1972. Before eco-dystopia was a term, ZPG painted a world where population control wasn't policy, it was law. Set in a choking future, Earth suffocated by smog and overbreeding, the film opens with a chilling proclamation: childbirth is now illegal. Instead, society offers robotic child substitutes, soulless dolls programmed to simulate parenting. Audiences in 1972 were quick to reject it. Critics called it nihilistic, morbid, even anti-human. The idea of governments criminalizing natural reproduction struck too close to fears of authoritarianism despite global concerns over resource exhaustion. Eugenics? That belonged to history's darker chapters, or so we thought. But today, as climate models trigger global conversations about limiting family size, and biotech firms discuss designer embryos to reduce medical costs, ZPG reads more like a policy draft than fiction. The synthetic child surrogates? They're not far from today's AI caregivers and android infants used in parental training program. The film doesn't offer a solution. It merely presents a suffocating mirror. And in that reflection, the real question becomes unavoidable. If we could edit life to fit a broken world, would we? Bonus fact: Who is Julia? 1980. 1. It aired once, then vanished. Who is Julia? Was a made-for-TV film from 1981 that quietly proposed a medical miracle and a metaphysical nightmare. A woman suffers a fatal accident. Another woman is brain dead. Doctors perform a full brain transplant. When the survivor awakens, she has Julia's body but someone else's memories, thoughts, instincts. The film wasn't graphic. It didn't need to be. The horror came from identity itself. What defines you when your biology and consciousness no longer match? The networks treated it like soft sci-fi. Reviews were mild. Audiences moved on. But in hindsight, Who is Julia was far ahead of its time. It questioned not only gene expression, but how far one could push body ownership, autonomy, and neurological continuity before a person becomes someone else. And now, with head transplants being actively explored in fringe science, with brain-machine interfaces inching closer to memory extraction, and with AI models replicating neural thought patterns, the core question no longer feels rhetorical. What happens when your genome says one thing, but your mind says another? Are we still the sum of our DNA, or has evolution shifted to the realm of thought? Maybe the reason Who is Julia disappeared was because it asks something too uncomfortable. What if the next phase of evolution isn't biological or even artificial? What if it's spiritual dislocation, dressed in scientific achievement? We once laughed at these films, called them dystopian, unscientific, overreaching. But decades later, the world they imagined is slowly unfolding, not in catastrophe, but in quiet, incremental advances. Maybe evolution isn't something that happens to us anymore. Maybe we've become the authors. But if that's true, what kind of future are we really designing? Which of these films do you think predicted too much too soon? And which one should we have listened to more carefully? Tell us in the comments before fiction becomes instruction.